I can definitely imagine Trump shaking hands with Putin.
The biggest problem of Trump is his unpredictability.
Russia is being under Chinese protection.
The Russian nuclear rhetoric being downplayed exactly because of the Chinese position.
We have some experience of negotiating with Russians.
When you have your citizens being killed, you don't have this time for bureaucracy.
Hi, my name is Alina Hrytsenko. I'm an international relations analyst, and this is Talking Substance. Today, we're going to be talking to Dr. Hanna Shelest, who is PhD in political science and security studies program director at Ukrainian Prism, a Ukrainian think tank. Today, we're going to be discussing wartime diplomacy, global peace summit, and many, many other interesting issues. Hello, Dr. Shelest. Welcome to Talking Substance. It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you for your time. So, you, as a director of security studies program at Ukrainian Prism Foreign Policy Council, and this is one of the topics we're going to discuss today. So security, diplomacy, as well as peace. And I would like to start with discussing the term wartime diplomacy, because in April, the first wartime diplomacy forum was held in Kyiv, and Minister Kuleba participated in that. And as far as I understand, it was Ukrainian Prism who was the initiator of such a forum. And I also have read that a research wartime diplomacy that you presented during this forum. So could you please talk me through about the idea of such a research project and about the idea of forum? And we're just going to discuss a little bit later about the difference between wartime diplomacy and peacetime diplomacy.
Thank you very much for the invitation. First of all, the wartime diplomacy is not the term that Ukrainian Prism invented. That's been used almost since day one of the Russian invasion in 2022 by the Minister of Foreign Affairs and his team, trying to explain that the classical diplomacy is important, but during the war, you definitely need to think differently and to adapt and adjust to the conditions in which we are. And it's not only the economy or the military who should be ready, but also diplomacy, because from diplomats around the globe, so many things depends on how much assistance, including military and diplomatic, Ukraine would receive. So last year, we published the first wartime diplomacy scorecards, but originally, the annual assessment of the Ukrainian foreign policy is what Ukrainian Prism is doing since 2015. So for us, it was issue number 9. However, really last year, considering this wartime diplomacy particularities, we changed a little bit our methodology, and last year presented the assessment of 2022 results of wartime diplomacy, and this April, the results of the 2023. And if last year that's been more of the ad hoc trying to capture and understand what it means to live in times of war, including for the foreign policy and diplomacy, so this year, we already started to see that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs created the respected website called Wartime Diplomacy, where they try to demonstrate all the efforts diplomats and civil society experts are doing around the globe to help Ukraine in these difficult times. So that was logical to do a joint event, Ukrainian Prism and Ministry of Foreign Affairs with assistance of Friedrich Ebert Foundation, where we started not just assess how we did, but also what we understand, what should be the principles, what should be the instruments. Can the foreign policy of Ukraine be the same as before, or what we need to do with it? Can we excuse some of the mistakes, or there is no right for a mistake during the war? So all these questions, in addition to the regular marks that we've been given to the different dimensions of Ukrainian foreign policy, there are around 50 of them, was the topic of this forum.
Could you please single out some tendencies or trends that were new during this last assessment in comparison to previous years, in comparison to particularly 2022 when the full-scale invasion broke out?
There are several tendencies that we definitely identified. The first of all, it is the increased attention to the countries of the so-called global south. It is still not strategic and coherent, let's say, because we know that each year we have one year the Asian focus, another one is African. Now Latin America is announced as the main focus, but still that is something beyond Europe. And that is understanding of Ukraine during the last 2 years that Ukraine needs a little bit more than European and Euro-Atlantic integration. That's still our top priorities. And you can see that despite everything, all the difficulties, but the reforms for NATO and the EU accession are on their full. But at the same time, the MFA realized that in the United Nations, we need voices of all 193 countries, that such countries as India or Brazil can significantly change the Russian alliances in the world. So that's why it's definitely overdue after 2 years, the clear tendency. The second tendency is that we have high concentration on the strategic communication compared to the previous periods. But at the same time, the strategic communications are still more of the crisis reaction, ad hoc, very tailored, but not strategic as we would like to see them in terms of the sustainability and the long-term effects.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's very interesting because you are saying pretty much the same that Ms. Alina Frolova told me when we had a discussion with her in one of our episodes. We were talking about strategic communications during peacetime, during wartime, especially stratcom in the military, and those the tendencies that she also singled out. So let's talk about those key wartime principles that Minister Kuleba highlighted during this forum. There was 7 of those. One of them is stubbornness, not being afraid of placing France in a comfortable position. So being harsh, being ready to push, no plan B, time compression in decision-making, flexibility in decision-making, and everybody talks to everybody. How would you assess such an approach to wartime diplomacy? Perhaps some additional points could be added to these 7, or maybe the point of not being afraid of placing France in a comfortable position is that particular different point when we talk about wartime and peacetime diplomacy, because not being afraid of putting France in a comfortable position sounds like a little bit not diplomatic, but this is obviously something that you have to do when you're waging war against an aggressor, a nuclear aggressor. Of course, when you lack some resources, you have to be stubborn and not being afraid of using harsh rhetorics toward France. But yeah, well, what is your take on that?
What we discussed with the team and what our results of 2023 demonstrated, that let's say 5 of 7 of these principles that Minister Kuleba announced were really good and they worked. Stubbornness is yes, and each time yes, because you can call it stubbornness, you can call it good work, or sort of even not the pressure, but understanding that you need to work as much as possible. And the reason was like, if you say no, if you receive no from your partners, it doesn't mean that the same no will be tomorrow, like we had with HIMARS, like we had with F-16, like we had with the different other things. So stubbornness, yes. Everybody talk to everybody also, yes, because we have limited capacities. And if we can unite efforts of the diplomats, of ministers, of members of parliament, of expert community, that gives results. Because not all members of the MFA or president can travel to Australia each year. So we can have parliamentary delegation, we can have expert delegation, we can have ministers. So that just help to have the maximum comprehensive approach, but also to demonstrate that the whole society supports these ideas, that it's not just one political class or one political party that's in favor of a certain decision. Then definitely time framing. That's what we agree completely, because when somebody is saying, yeah, but you understand that is European bureaucracy, or that is this type of the democracy, that's cool. But when you have your citizens being killed, you don't have this time for bureaucracy. And you need to start to understand what can be done in these conditions, what can be done quickly, where it is just the habit to do it slower, but not the necessity of some procedures. So that's important. And it seems to me that we help some organizations to reform and to adapt to the modern conditions by themselves as well. And they're quite grateful for this. Mm-hmm. The problem that definitely we probably had is with this idea about putting your friends in uncomfortable conditions. And the reason is that, unfortunately, we saw several flashbacks from this situation last year. That is the very thin line between your stubbornness and putting your friends in uncomfortable conditions. Frankness with your friends when you're saying that we understand why you are doing this or something, and making something public. Because if you remember, like just one example that became very public, so we can speak about it, it's not a secret, the Vilnius summit of NATO, and when the Ukrainian side made several tweets and statements just in the midst of the preparation of the final declaration, we know that few leaders of the other countries became very furious, the advisors became very furious, and the wording of some clauses being changed, I would say not in favor of Ukraine. So was it good? That was risky. We hoped for something, but probably at that time we needed to consider better what we could do with the classical diplomacy or what we could do with this. The second issue is about Plan B. That's also a little bit controversial, and Minister Kuleba explained it in quite a good way, so you can agree with him. He's saying, like, we're working for the maximum, for the winning, for the restoring of sovereignty, for returning of everything. That's good if you consider this as Plan A. And Plan B, as some of mediators propose, like, for example, Crimea is not now at the negotiation tables. That can be one Plan B. And in this case, definitely, Ukraine is working only with the Plan A. But at the same time, in diplomacy, you need to be ready, and in foreign policy in general, to plan A, B, C, D, E. Mm-hmm. It means that we should have, the same as military has all of these. You need to have your maximum. And it's not about compromises, but that's also about searching of the other options and alternative decisions. If one country doesn't want to do something with the sanctions, how we can persuade them to do different things, maybe not naming it sanctions, but still be in our camp.
Mm-hmm. So I see that the main, not the main, but one of the key features of wartime diplomacy is being tough, being harsh, being persistent and rigorous. But at the same time, this approach sometimes doesn't really work with, as you have mentioned already, the so-called global South countries. And it seems like we still have to adapt this wartime diplomacy, and we still have to look for some individual approaches to certain countries, as well as India. We have to take, or China, for example, we have to take into account also their stance on the war, their position, their national interests. So wartime diplomacy still has to be flexible at some point, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I said 2 of 7 that we disagree, and flexibility is the fifth that we absolutely agree. And that's why I said that this Plan B is a little bit contradictory by itself, because if you're flexible, it means that you already have the certain Plan B, C, or D. And if you have only Plan A, where is your flexibility? So these 2 principles de facto are just contradicting, opposing each other. But flexibility, yes, that's exactly what we need. And by the way, peace formula and how it worked as for now, that definitely demonstrated this flexibility. When we said to our partners, we understand that not all of you can take all 10 principles of the peace formula. So let's look which of them you can take. So if you're ready only for the food security, be with us at least for the food security. If you're ready to speak only about the return of the kidnapped Ukrainian kids, let you be involved in this sphere. That's already important, and more voices we have for this, it means one problem that we can solve. That is one of the quite a good examples of this flexibility.
Yes, exactly. I was pretty much impressed by Minister Kuleba's visit to India, where he announced that peace formula is more of a menu where different countries can pick different points, and if they are ready to put some effort and resources into implementing these certain points, like ecological safety is important for example, Vietnam or India or Thailand. So you are welcome, more than welcome to join us, because this is something of a global scale point. Food security and nuclear security. This is a good approach to draw some attention from different countries, even such controversial ones like China, for example. So that, from my perspective, personally, was a very nice step, especially in terms of the upcoming Global Peace Summit. So, and I believe that this wartime diplomacy points and principles are working quite well, because we are expecting more than 100 countries who were invited during this global peace summit. Although it's not yet decided and announced what level, like we expect foreign leaders from the Western countries. However, with the global South countries, it is still unknown. We have some controversial ones, like Brazilian president who has already made some unpleasant announcement and suggestions, like you stop the war, and like we can exchange that for Crimea, for example. India is still unknown. However, we see some interest from our Indian counterparts in this peace building and peacekeeping process and negotiations. But what expectations do you have from this global peace summit? Because obviously this is only the first one in a row, certainly, because there will be an event of the year, perhaps, where different countries are going to probably work on a little bit more on the peace formula, perhaps to elaborate some of the points, perhaps to change the formulations a little bit, because if we do understand the importance of fairness, the concept of fairness. So Russia has to be responsible for all the war crimes that have been done on the Ukrainian soil. But that also means that this point has to deal with Putin, with the leadership, with some of the Russian leadership. There are some countries who do not accept this point, who are a little bit dubious because it's politically sensitive and vulnerable point. So if I do expect that the countries and the representatives are going to just discuss the peace formula. Perhaps some of them are going to announce that they are going to join the implementation of some of the points. But what it's still not going to be something that is going to end war, definitely. So what expectations do you have from the Global Peace Summit?
Let's go step by step. And first of all, is definitely, if we go by the points of the peace formula, you're right. The question of justice and punishment, that's the most difficult over there, and what considered by many countries, especially of the global South, as the most political, rather than just about justice, even by those countries that experienced war in the past. And that's unfortunately. So that's where we still need a lot of work, and I need to explain that it's not just something running against Russia by the West and Americans, but that is the result of all those war crimes that Russia committed in Ukraine. But when you go to the countries, I don't like to speak about expectations, because that is exactly about the wartime diplomacy. You are working till the last day. And till the last day, you don't know whom you really will be able to have. And it's better to analyze whom we had and how successful it was. However, what we know as for now, that we invited more than 160 countries, from which 50 already confirmed. That's what we have. We have approximately 50 who confirmed participation, but we don't know the level. Ukrainian side is aiming to the top level. So we are speaking about president, prime minister, or the maybe governor of the country, but definitely even not the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Understanding that for many other situations, Minister of Foreign Affairs already would be cool, but if we speak about a summit, we are aiming for the same as what we have during the annual UN General Assembly. Here, we definitely have the question of schedules of the leaders of the countries. A lot of all the small countries for whom it's just very expensive and problematic of traveling. Yep. So we need to consider all these points, and now all this work is happening. And I understand that they're still considering. It's not that they're against, they're just trying to understand how they can do it. And do they really have interest? Because let's be honest, we've been traveling in an Asia-Pacific region for the last year, doing a lot of the expert visits. And in each of these countries, we received the question, explain us why we should care. It's not that they think that Russia is not an aggressor or Russia should not be punished. No, they absolutely agree. And in the United Nations, they are supporting Ukraine. But when we speak about something more, any type of the assistance or peace summit, they say, But why should we care? We have our problems. Like that's your problems. Like do it within your region. You don't care about what is happening here. Why we should care about you? That's actually the result of the Ukrainian diplomacy in the previous 30 years when we were not paying attention to many of these small countries.
Yeah, exactly.
And now, that's our harvest of these. Then you have some countries that could be Ukrainian friends, but who never participated in the meetings, even at the level of advisors. Some of them explain this, that they are trying to balance. Yep. Sometimes it is big countries like China who said that, okay, they participated in 1 from 4 meetings and they said, we need to keep this balance between Russia and Ukraine if we would like to be mediators. I don't believe in Chinese mediation, but that's their statements. There are small countries like Singapore who totally accepted that Russia is an aggressor, but they're just saying that we are too far. Yeah. And that is the third issue, partially for this, that in some countries, these spring are elections. So the previous governments or presidents didn't want to make these decisions because they were not sure in their victory. And they just postponed these decisions till the election. And many of these countries are back in those regions that is very important for us in so-called global south. So I assume that probably beginning of June, when it would be more adequate to make the real predictions about what is coming there. And let's not forget about another side, that Russia is counter-working a lot. And we know that the Russian diplomacy is very actively working, especially in Asia and Africa, not to allow these countries to come, but to say to make everything possible for them to reject the invitations. Somebody received very nice proposals, somebody are just with the propaganda. I mean, very, very different methods are used. But the question is, how successful are these methods and who in the result will be more successful? What will be the final of these summits? I don't have the big expectations. Doesn't matter how many countries will be. Because this summit is definitely, first of all, first. The second, it is more about stating positions and identifying issues. And the certain demonstration of who is in the club of the good guys. Plus, the best would be at least adoption of the certain declaration with the principles from these, where countries would agree that, yes, there are problems that we need to resolve here, here, and here. But the real work, the real decisions are done more in the working groups rather than at the big summit.
So Russia was not invited to the summit. Russian representatives were not invited, which is totally understandable because currently negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, from my perspective, at this exact point, is not possible. Well, I mean, it is possible, but perhaps those could just be in vain, actually. But at the same time, there was a statement from one of the Office of the President of Ukraine representatives that perhaps sometime in the future, a little bit later, Russia could be potentially invited to this multilateral negotiations, peace summits in the future. Do you actually believe in this potential negotiations between Russia and Ukraine could be those fruitful? And I also do not believe in China as a mediator, as a negotiator, obviously. But to me, it seems like India is trying to catch the initiative and to offer a platform, to offer being a mediator between Ukraine and Russia. So the question is it actually relatable to initiate some negotiations with Russia? I do not mean that Ukraine has to initiate those, but it seems like Russia is trying to give us some signals, because when in China, Putin has given an interview to one of the Chinese news agencies, Xinhua, where he stated that Russia values the effort that China puts into the negotiation and peacemaking process. So it seems like Russia is trying to create such an image that Russia is being under Chinese protection, and Russia understands that they are losing this war, that they are not capable of winning the war on military, with their military capabilities and military resources. So they're saying that, okay, we're ready. We're ready for negotiations. We just don't want to admit it, and we are trying to use China as our representatives, as a matter of fact. So how and I cannot even imagine how these potential negotiations between Ukraine and Russia could potentially be handled? Like the atmosphere, what can we discuss? Like what are the terms? Because we have quite a certain and clear goal that we want to deoccupy all the territories. We are aiming at 1991 borders, internationally accepted borders. So what could be potentially the topics during these negotiations with Russia, if those are actually possible sometime later in the future? Because now we do understand that those military actions, there is sort of a dead end, so to speak. It is impossible to win war. Not like Russia cannot win this war in military terms. Ukraine cannot win this war. So what can we potentially negotiate with Russians? Because we have some experience of negotiating with Russians. We have experience of making deals with Russians, and they just broke those deals later, a little bit later. So what can we potentially negotiate about?
So, de facto, you raised three questions, and let's try to break them a little bit, and that will help us as well. So, first, the question about the China and India as a possible mediator. So, the person who defended PhD many years ago on the mediation of the military conflict, I would say that neither India nor China can be considered as the mediators. What India is trying to do is more of the facilitation efforts, because they don't propose anything. And they just said that they're ready to be the certain place for this, and they would like peace in the whole world. Yeah, as at Miss Universe competition, they usually say. With the China, the situation was more difficult because everybody remember their peace plan. But de facto, even the Chinese officials themselves been talking that it is not the plan, because there is no decisions, there are no resolutions, there is no actions there. It's more like Chinese position about how they would like to see. And that is exactly what the principle of mediation is violating. I mean, that it's not your interest, it is the interest of the countries that should be considered. And de facto, in many of the actions that we currently observe, China is definitely violating all the basic principles of the mediator, from impartiality to the military support of one of the states. I mean, many others. We can go in the theory of practice, but China is definitely not doing what should be called mediation. That's why they will not be successful, because they are doing for their interest. It's not only biased, but the question is that they put their own interest on the top, not even Russian or Ukrainian interest on the top. So that is more of the instrument of their foreign policy rather than the mediation efforts. The second question is about the who can win the war or not, because for mediation, it's always very important moment called timing. Is it everybody who studies the mediation of military conflict starts from the question is, what is the right timing for this? And here, the question is that you consider that Russia cannot win the war. The problem is that Russia considers that they can't win the war. And that should be the parties to the conflict who understand that it is the certain stalemate moment. That can be because you're too weak, both countries are too weak, or because both are too strong, so you understand that it's better to sit and to talk about something. But as soon as you consider that you still can gain something with the military means, 90% that your negotiations would not be successful. They will be just for some minor issues like exchange of the prisoners, decision of some humanitarian issues, or just to buy time. And here, that's why we are coming to the third question that you raised about the possibility of the negotiations with Russia and using the peace summit for this. First of all, the negotiations with Russia as the general, we understand that most of their calls are coming exactly in the time when Ukraine needs to receive additional military support from our partners. Because they would like to persuade our partners that, no, we are ready to talk, so don't provide these weapons to Ukraine. You are escalating, and that will not be good for the negotiations. And unfortunately, we saw in the past 2 years that they have been successful in this. That's why Russia is using it again and again. Luckily, our partners started to buy this narrative less and less. But they are trying, and they would like to demonstrate also for the global South that, look, it's Ukraine and the US who doesn't want negotiations. They would like just more militarization wherever, and we are calling for the peace. So that's also this, propaganda element in this that is very important. The peace summit itself, for the first, is definitely because all the countries that just would like to get the unilateral position of the participants and their position against the aggressor in general. But then for the third, second, doesn't matter which of the summits, can Russia be invited? Theoretically, we can imagine this. This can be the requirements even of some of our partners. But the question is what to talk about. Because what I really don't like when a lot of international commenters are just saying, oh, negotiations should be that. Yes, but negotiations is just the instrument. The question is, what are you going to talk at this negotiation? Mm-hmm. So, for example, if everybody will gather and will start to speak about energy security and how not to use energy infrastructure as the way of, or nuclear, how not to use nuclear power plants as their dirty bombs, yes, Russia can be invited and discussed. That can be the issue. That's not about the end of the war. That's about the certain rules of the war, or about food security, again, about blocking of the ports or something like this. 150 countries would have their position, Russia from another side, maybe with some of the partners, and you discuss about the new principles, maybe the new arms control treaty or something like this would appear after this. That would be like the start. But definitely, peace formula is not about ending the war. Yes, that's more, it's much wider. If we look inside of the peace formula, the fact that there is nothing about how to finish this war. That is more about how to respect certain principles of what is important in the current conditions, what problems and crises and threats the Russian aggression against Ukraine raised for the global community. Because when you look inside, it's not just about Ukraine. That is the same message that other countries, other aggressors can use in their respective regions. And that's why we managed to invite so many countries of the global south, because they are also learning the lessons and what to expect in case any other country would decide to repeat Russian experience.
It also brings me to the question, one of the key points of peace formula is radiation nuclear safety. And the peace formula says that Ukrainian nuclear power plants and installations must operate safely under Ukraine's sovereign control. And especially Zaporizhzhia MPP shall be completely demilitarized. And Russian troops have to be withdrawn from this particular nuclear power plant. It also leads me to the question about how to do that, because I see an opportunity of bringing the United Nations to this, to deal with this issue. So that brings me to the question about the role of the United Nations in potential peace building and peacekeeping process in Ukraine, whether United Nations are still trustworthy in this conflict.
First of all, we always forget that we need to think about the United Nations not as just the Security Council General Assembly, but that is the huge machine, the system of different organizations involved. So you cannot say how effective is the United Nations if you assess only the activities or the decisions of one of the bodies from this system. How much the United Nations High Commission on Refugees helped, especially in the first days. How much UNICEF is helping, how much UN Women is doing, what UNDP is doing now, helping with the reconstruction, a lot of the stuff. So I can continue this list, UNESCO that is involved. So these organizations are important, they're successful. Maybe some processes are going slower, some issues, but we see the results of what they are doing on the ground. With all their bureaucracy, but that is the question, not about Ukraine, that is in general the questions about the reform of the United Nations that we have for the last 10 years. Then you have the General Assembly, and we saw the results when more than 140 countries have been voting for Ukrainian resolutions. And these resolutions they are not with the decisions, but then the international courts are referring to the decisions of these resolutions. So that is the long-term effect, and it will be continuing this long-term effect, considering how many we have in the different courts, commercial arbitrage or the interstate cases. So that all would have the result. The Security Council, that's who appeared ineffective, but we understand why, because we have Russia as the permanent member, and that's something what we cannot change. We cannot do anything with this. We just need to use this Security Council as much as we can for attracting attention, including of the media, to the certain issues. The last, because you started from the nuclear question, that is definitely the question to the Atomic Agency. Mm-hmm. And here we had different situations. Originally, we saw quite a weak position. It's also been, I think, resulted because there were quite a number of Russian citizens among the management originally. And it's always the question of sabotage, that you can do it any of the levels. And they try to be impartial. But what we see from the last year decisions of the board of directors of the mission that we have on the ground, they started to be much bolder. They started to be more frank and transparent and more pro-Ukrainian. So there is no anymore say that something like in the passive clause, something being shoot or wherever. They already said that, yes, Russian forces are doing this, or Russia violates this, Russia should do this. So we see the evolution and development of these organizations as well. However, when you speak about can we do something at the more serious level, here we need to understand that we need support of all nuclear powers. Here we need their unanimity as much as possible. And here we have quite an interesting situation. When China, originally, we know that a lot of the Russian nuclear rhetoric being downplayed exactly because of the Chinese position. Because for China, nuclear security is one of the extremely important topics, and they are very responsible. They think that, yes, it is deterrence instrument, but you should not overuse it, so not to lose the value of it. And we have not heard it publicly, but we know from a lot of the closed-door discussions that Chinese constantly are repeating this to Russians, don't use, and Russian rhetoric declined a little bit in this way. However, India, another nuclear power, I don't remember any real statements from India about the nuclear security, even more from my personal experience. In December last year, we were with the visit in India. We had wonderful meetings with all the best think tanks in the country. And we tried to check like what issues are interested for India in terms of this peace process. And we thought that nuclear, because first of all, India is nuclear. The second, because India has conflict with China, with another permanent Security Council member with nuclear weapons. Pakistan, there were no interest. There were no interest. Not that they did, but they said like, oh yeah, but you know, food security is more important. So it's not that they allowed Russia to do it, but we couldn't get this interest neither from the foreign policy, not from the military. They still didn't feel the urgency of these issues compared to others. So only when we would have all these countries thinking and saying that this type of the behavior is inappropriate, then we will be able to press the Russian Federation more efficiently.
So there's one question that I was thinking about discussing with you is the upcoming U.S. presidential election, because there is 50% chance that Donald Trump can potentially win this election. And does it mean, if Trump is elected, does it mean that we will have to change our wartime diplomacy approach in any way?
First of all, the biggest problem of Trump is his unpredictability. Yes, I mean, the biggest problem, maybe for him that is not a problem, but for us as partners, that's the biggest problem. That's why with all his negative statements that we have now, we also, having already him as a president before, so we can make some parallels to his pattern of behavior, we know that not always what he is telling during the presidential campaign or the public rally is what he is actually doing. Because let's remember that the decision about, the first decision about providing Ukraine with lethal weapons been done by him and his team. So for me, it's not just the question of Trump, but also who would be in his team. And that's what we still don't know. Whom he would decide to have as the vice president, State Secretary, Defense Secretary, and National Security Advisor. Only when I see these 4 nominations, that would really signalize for me what type of the foreign policy Trump can have. Because now a lot of things that he is stating just to be against the position of Democrats and Biden. Also, because he needs quick successes, and he likes quick successes, he likes some show off. Giving Ukraine weapons and gaining some success on the battlefield, that is this type of the activity. So we also can expect that after January 2025, he would make a different decision, because he would like to demonstrate that Biden was so weak, he couldn't even provide you with the proper weapons. Get it. And he also needs to understand why it is beneficial for him to support Ukraine, not Russia. So now he is not supporting Ukraine, not because he thinks that Russia is good, but because that is more beneficial to him in terms of his political career. That's why, should Ukraine change its policy? I'm not sure. Ukraine definitely should consider these new conditions in which we would be. And but in general, our policy will be the same: to have the bipartisan support, to work with the United States as a strategic partner, to be flexible, to be stubborn. But one thing already is in process as well, how we adjusted to this new reality of the Trump people in the Congress, that's to work more with Europe. And it's not only us, but our European partners who learned this lesson and who is now trying to think what we can do without relying on the United States.
I can definitely imagine Trump trying to become that exact mediator that China or India is trying to promote themselves. Because I do remember Trump shaking hands with Kim Jong-un. So I can definitely imagine Trump shaking hands with Putin. And it's also a question of strategic communications. If, for example, Trump decides to play in this negotiation and peacemaking process, if he meets Putin for a bilateral summit, perhaps, there's a question, an urgent question of how Ukraine reacts on this.
That's all depends how he would present it, because I can expect Trump meeting Putin, and here we need to differentiate the ideas inside of the Trump mind. He accepts that Russia is an aggressor and Russia is bad. I mean, he's open about this. He's not trying to excuse Russia. But he is not thinking about Putin as something bad. He even likes some of his authoritarian methods and how it works. Because Trump likes strong leaders, or at least who he perceived as strong leader.
Okay.
So that's why for him, activities against Russia and meeting Putin and talking to him, that can be just absolutely parallel processes. And he can consider that meeting Putin is something where he can persuade Putin, or at least bargain. Because Trump is coming from business and he considers all relations as business. In business, he had different cases, different contracts. So why not to try the same tough negotiations as he had for buying some property with the president of another state? He never thinks that it is not good to sit with your adversary at one table. It's just with what you are coming to this table, and are you able to be a tougher guy than your opponent?
Okay, I see that. Well, thank you very much for this substantial discussion. It was great pleasure having you.
Thank you for the invitation.
This was Talking Substance. Thank you for being with us on this episode. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And do not miss the next episode.